Welcome to Saturdays at 7, Christian Scholars Review's conversation series with thought leaders about the academic vocation and the relationship that vocation shares with the church. My name is Todd Ream. I have the privilege of serving as the publisher for Christian Scholars Review and as the host for Saturdays at 7. I also have the privilege of serving on the faculty and the administration at Indiana Wesleyan University. Our guest is Cyrus Chestnut, widely acclaimed pianist, composer, and master instructor of jazz piano and improvisation at Howard University. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much, Todd. It's good to be here. Good to be with you.
Several music critics argue that you're the greatest jazz pianist of our time. For example, one critic, when writing in Time magazine, argued, "What makes Chestnut the best jazz pianist of his generation is a willingness to abandon notes and play in space." However, you're also a widely known composer. Would you begin by sharing the process you undergo when composing a song, and then perhaps also aligning songs for an album?
The process of composition starts with the idea. And for me, inspiration can come from so many different points of view. For me, composition is not just about sitting at the piano and said, okay, let me figure something out. Although that part, it also is a part of what I do. The song of the Lord, I guess I could say. I think I could say that. The song of the Lord, it's not just at the piano. It's with me as I walk day to day. And so a melody can find its way to me in any given point. A lot of times, the way how I compose, I do a lot of composition away from the piano. And I like to do that because it makes me really rely on the actual melody, the actual rhythm, versus sitting at the piano and relying on a lot of theories. Now, the theories are important, but once again, sometimes the song of the Lord goes a little bit against what we think of theory. And so I try to do my best to just allow myself to be open to hear. And as these melodies come across, I start to write. And once I get a draft together, then that's when I will sit down at the piano and check my hearing. And sometimes there's certain tweaks that will have to be done to make the composition work. Sometimes compositions are logical, meaning that the movement from point A to B is very traditional, something expected. And then sometimes the composition or arrangement can have non-traditional movement. What I like to say is misdirection. Take the listener in a certain direction, and when one thinks the music is supposed to arrive at a certain destination, sometimes it is intriguing, if I can say, to get to your destination from a whole different way. I'd like to say also, too, that there are many different ways of getting from point A to point B. And that's the challenge. Trying to figure out, there's the usual ways of getting from point A to point B, but then there's the unusual way. And sometimes in finding something unusual, you really trigger the intrigue of a person. So, it's not so familiar, meaning that, oh, there's interest. Oh, what's happening here? So there's a different type of engagement, if I could say.
Thank you. Can you say a little bit more about that process of checking your own hearing? What does it look like if we were to watch you or observe you as you're checking your hearing and something is going from the melody that you hear to notes on a page?
as far as when I talk about checking my hearing, I will write certain things down on the paper. I'm still one of those people that have a manuscript book and I write with pen because that's the first point of entry. I'll use technology to clean up my chicken scratch, so to speak, so it becomes a little more legible. But as this idea in rhythm, melody, and harmony, however these elements present themselves to me, I will start to write. And then when once done, then I will sit down at the piano and I'll uh, attempt to check and see if what I'm playing go along with what I'm hearing. Sometimes it works well, and sometimes it doesn't. And so there is a back and forth process. I'll sit and I'll play a piece, and I might get to one place and say, you know what? I'm not sure if that's right. So in this moment, that's when my study and the development and the theoretical knowledge of how communicate via music kicks in. So that, okay, well, I don't like this movement. Maybe I need to do maybe a little different half step movement, or maybe I need to find a different tonal center to still get there. Or if I'm writing something that says, well, you know what, this sounds like something that I've already done. So then it's about going back to the drawing board again and
Yeah.
all. So conception in the head, writing on paper, music checking, so to speak, at the
Yeah.
piano, and then once that's satisfactory, then I'm ready to present it. Now, in the spirit of the jazz musician and in the jazz tradition, I believe that music evolved. And I just did an interpretation of the Duke Ellington Sacred Concert. And in my research, I found out by reading and also talking to people who had spent time with Duke. Uh, Duke he was always very much in the moment. I was told that a lot of the sacred concerts did not get put down really on paper until he transitioned because they were
Hmm.
always changing. They were always changing. And I think if you think about Ellington, um, that's why there's so many different versions of Take the A Train and so many different versions of Satin Doll because he was always in the mode of creation, not
Yeah.
necessarily recreation. And so the reason I say that is this: once a composition is put out into the atmosphere, it will evolve. At a certain point, it will either grow to something else. It may go somewhere different. It's not something that once I write it down, that's the way how it's going to be for the rest of its life. I was taught, and I guess I'm skipping a little further here. Even studying at the Peabody Preparatory, I was always put in a creative mode. My whole life has always been about creation, playing in the church. Yes, I read the hymns out of the hymn book, but there was a lot of times where I was asked just to create something and just play something. So from an early age, I was placed in this mode of creation. At the Peabody, we would study Gregorian chants and the period of the Baroque or whatever, but it was then our task to write based on what we studied. So I was always put in a mode of, once again, a mode of creation. And so the transition over to jazz for me is very easy because jazz at its finest is about improvisation. I like the definition that Lauren Schoenberg gave to share
Hmm.
with me about improvisation. He said composition, like improvisation, at a slowed down pace with an eraser, and improvisation is composition at a rapid pace. I hope I said that right. With no erase. In both situations, we still creating. One, you create and you write it on paper, and that's what that thought is. The other is still creation. You're still communicating, it's still very necessary to understand the principles, the basic principles of music, rhythm, melody, and harmony. You need to understand about quarter notes and different pulses, quarter notes, eighth notes, triplets, 16th notes, whatsoever. You need to also understand about scales, the sound of the chord, so that you can best communicate. One can have a sound in their ear, but if you don't know how to process what you hear and effectively communicate, then a lot of that great sound just stays locked up in your head and
Yeah.
unable to be shared with the universe.
Well, and that process of improvisation is what adds to the enormous beauty of the genre of jazz. It's also the same thing that unless we have recordings of actual performances, that drives archivists crazy. Because when we don't know when the music sheets get logged into the archives, whether that's actually what got performed or not. So no,
Mhm.
but it's part of the
Yeah.
beauty of it.
You know, a
Yeah,
lot of times what has been transcribed or whatever could have been a musical moment at that time.
yeah,
And so just as we are speaking together here, this conversation is not really scripted per se. We did not practice these questions and my responses. I did not write them down and I'm not reading them. They have not been edited. It's just my thoughts right now, right in the moment. And I think music at its best is that type of communication of where
yeah.
there's an emotion. One feels a certain emotion, and so you try to take sound to match that emotion to soothe or encourage the individual.
Thank you. You mentioned your time at Peabody, which you started when you were 9 years old, and then eventually you went on to study at Berklee College of Music. Before asking more about those experiences, though, I've gotta ask about where you first learned to play, which was with your father, at Baltimore's Mount Calvary Star Baptist Church. At what point did your father, and perhaps also your mother, know you were given a gift in terms of the piano?
Well, I guess that's probably something you would have to ask my mom to. From what I know and what I remember, my father would have told the story about how somewhere between 2 and 3. Well, even before that, my father taught himself how to play piano. He played in the church pretty much until the point he transitioned until over to the other side. My mom sang in the church and so my mom tells the story of when I was in the belly, so to speak. My father would play and my mom would sing. So even before I officially got here, I was hearing music. My father would put me in the bassinet and start playing, and I would just get very quiet and just he said somewhere between 2 and 3, I guess I got the strength to climb up on the piano bench. I climbed up on the piano bench and I just tried to do what he did. And so I kept doing it. I kept doing it. I kept doing it. I kept doing it. And so he went out and bought me 2 books, the Lela Fletcher piano chord. And he started to show me the basics of piano. And he also said this too. He said, shortly before he passed away, he said, "Son, I could leave you an inheritance, but I believed if I got you to music, you'd be just fine." And so therefore, I'm grateful to God for putting that thought in my father's head and passing it along to me because I am okay. Inheritance or no inheritance. I have music and that'll take me for the rest of the years. So he did that and he started showing me around 5 years old. I had my first lesson with a quote unquote professional teacher, Ada Jenkins, in Baltimore, Maryland. And I just told this story just about a day or so My father had a 64 key piano, a spinet piano, it's an acoustic piano with 64 keys. That's how I learned to play on. And so Miss Jenkins, she asked me one of my first assignments was to tell her how many keys were there on the piano. So I went home and I counted 64 keys. Came back to Miss Jenkins and says, she asked me how many. I said 64. She gave me this puzzled look and said, "You sure?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." Go back home and count again. Go back home, count the keys on the piano. Counted them once, twice, 64 keys. Came back to her the next week. "Miss Jenkins, my piano has 64 keys." "Really?" She asked me to count the keys on her piano. Said, "Well, your piano has 88 keys." Okay. So I said, "Your piano has more keys than mine." So I go back home, and Miss Jenkins called my parent, and they said, "I want y'all to sit down with him and count the keys on the piano." So we all sat there, the three of us. We counted the keys on the piano, and we agreed that there were 64 keys. My father went into the kitchen, had a conversation with Miss Jenkins, and about a week and a half later, there was an 88 key piano in the house. So he and my mom invested much into me, because I think they knew, and they saw something that maybe at a young age I didn't really realize, that the journey of music was for me. And so I just recently opened at Carnegie Hall and just did, as I said, the Duke Ellington Sacred Concert at the Kennedy Center. Two major, headline in two major institutions. My mom was there. I said, "Well, Mom," I said, "I hope you can see the return on your investment." I wish my father could have been there to see it. But, I believe that he's smiling down, smiling from ear to ear. But to see what he said to me is coming to fruition. I believe I've been placed here to play music. I could do many other things, but I believed I was given this gift to be able to change the universe, to affect the universe. And so that's what I do to the best of my ability. And in my prayer is that it helps people. And I hope what I do is pleasing to God Almighty. And therefore, the assignment that's been placed on my life, I would like to do the best to complete it. And then when I'm finished on this side, then I'll go over and hang out with Art Tatum and the cats and talk about it.
Thank you very much. That's quite a gift, your parents and the Lord offered you through them. As I mentioned when we started, you also, in addition to serving as a composer and performer, you teach at Howard University. As a teacher then, what do you believe is the greatest gift you can offer your students?
Sharing my experiences, encouraging them and empowering them to the best of my ability, helping them to believe in what's been placed in them. I often say, if I can do it, if I can headline Carnegie Hall, so can you.
Yep.
You just got to believe it. You got to do the work. I teach because I love to do it, and teach because as many hands were extended to me to help me, and still hands are out there extended to me, then I have to pass it on. I have to extend my hand to that next generation to help them become who they're supposed to be. I don't expect them to go to school to become no Art Tatums or Ella Fitzgeralds or Sarah Vaughns. Sarah Vaughan told her story. Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, they all told their stories. Nobody's going to tell their story better than them. They lived it. But this next generation, they have to tell their story. Now, they can be inspired by history and by the musical ancestors, of course. But, quote Betty Carter, jazz is about finding out who you are. And so it's my desire to help them find who they are, come to grips with who they are, and to be able to share that and do what they're supposed to do.
Change subjects here just a little bit and ask you a little bit more about connections between jazz and its genre as being, in your estimation, deeply religious. You've often talked about the connection between jazz and God, and the jazz is, again, that musical genre that has deeply religious orientation to it. Would you unpack for us some of those connections and perhaps even offer a few examples of where those connections are made and how those connections are made?
I can first talk about Thomas Dorsey. Thomas Dorsey, who is known as the father of gospel music. Thomas Dorsey was Georgia Tom, who was a great blues pianist. He wrote a whole bunch of blues compositions, I believe, for Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith. Through a life-changing situation, his text changed and became, I think, what he called gospel, the good news. However, the engine didn't change. The same triplet feeling stayed there. The same movement, the same blues movement stayed there if you look at it. From going from 1 to 4, back to 1, to 5 and all. That same big traditional blues progression stayed there. And then there's also, and furthermore, you think about within, say, the African American culture, I'm finding out that the triplet is very much there. Hence why I like to say the swing feel. Growing up in church, there were certain hymns that we sang out of the hymn book, but there was this term called gospelizing. Hope I'm not getting too technical here. But every quarter note, it was more like it was done in divisions of 3. So if something was 4/4, the way house, rather than it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, we put the triplet to it, 1 and the 2 and the 3 and the 4. Okay, so 4/4 became 12/8. If it's 3, 1, 2, 3 is 1 and the 2 and the 3 and so and if you hear how, like, if you think about Mahalia Jackson and all, you could go back to Scott Joplin and hear and although the text is different, the rhythm is still there. Scott Joplin, Jelly Roll Morton. There's this certain thing, there's a certain groove that comes very deep out of the African American culture that even to this day, for instance, even if you think about, oh wow, like say even Twinkie Clark and the Clark sisters, and you even hear certain elements of that swing. As far as I will say in regards to that rhythmic engine that finds its way in jazz, that's in gospel, it's this underlying current that's there. And one doesn't have to take my word for it, just do the research.
Yeah.
Just do the research. Good Lord is very crafty. And he knows how to communicate in so many. I think a lot of times we think that, okay, in order for it to be spiritual, it has to be done in one specific way. But I think that there's many different ways. And if you really think about the motive of the person, that could tell a lot about the music. And so for me and whose I am and where I come from, I come out the church. I'm still in the church. And so whether I'm playing in the stadium or playing a Sunday morning service or playing a concert hall or playing a jazz club, I am who I am. And I'm not ashamed to present that. Just a couple days ago, I was down in Easton, Maryland. A whole jazz concert series. And in the middle of the concert, I did a 3/4 jazz waltz version of There Is a Fountain Filled with Blood. So on a Saturday night, people heard a communion hymn. I have to be honest with who I am. And I think we have to be willing to be a witness wherever. It's not just in the designated area. I think if you think about the life of Jesus Christ, he just wasn't just only in the synagogue. He was out and about spreading the good news. And so therefore, I believe that's what we have to do. Kind of be able to get out there and spread the good news.
Yeah.
And because there's enough tension out in this world now. But be it as it may, you still have to put a balm of healing out there.
Hmm.
And sometimes for me, music is a way of being able to reach people who understand we might not speak the same verbal language, but they can feel what I'm about by playing music.
I'll say this, your most recent album, My Father's Hands, came out as I was going through a difficult time professionally. And the song, Everything's Gonna Be All Right, that was 6 minutes and 31 seconds of pure joy. Every time I'd pop that, I'm still a CD player here.
Yeah.
Every time I pop that in my car and head to work, it was 6 minutes and 31 seconds of pure joy that then lingered long after that 6 minutes and 31 seconds.
That's, that was I think the song you talked about is called Working Out Just Fine.
Yep.
And that was one of my father's, one of his very important catchphrases later on in his life. I said, Daddy, how you doing? He says, oh, everything working. I said, everything's working out just fine. It's like, don't you worry. Everything's just going to work out just fine.
Which I couldn't help but note on that album too, in terms of how it was arranged, the song that it immediately follows too, which I believe the full title is I've Got to See Jesus.
Yep, I must tell Jesus, yep. That was one of his favorite hymns. And, and in that moment, I think about it now as I sat down at the piano to record it. I wanted to play it, but I had no idea how it was going to happen. Peter Washington and Louis Nash, went in the control room. And I said, okay, I'm going to sit down and do this. So I took a breath, placed my hands on the piano, and then that's what happened. I think, sometimes there's beautiful magic in these moments, It's a beautiful thing to allow yourself to yield to the Spirit and be moved by the Spirit. A lot of times we want to have control, I'll say, over what we do and how we do it. But then sometimes you just have to really just kind of just yield and just stretch out, have some faith. I tell a lot of people, tell my students a lot, in the case of improvisation takes faith. You're going in a realm that you don't necessarily, that you think you're not quite sure what's going to happen, but you trust that as you start to go through, you'll make it through. And so the realm of the unknown can be very rewarding, but it can be very scary too. But you gotta have the faith to go through, because if you don't take the chance, if you don't allow yourself to go there, sometimes I think, I talk about the musician, we get in the way. We want to think about, have everything completely worked out. But then sometimes all we can do is allow ourselves to be a conduit. And so the conduit is filled with knowledge of rhythm, melody, and harmony. But you got to let the Spirit work through the conduit, if that makes any type of sense. And as the Spirit works through the conduit, then music happens. It might be in a traditional way, and it may be in a non-traditional way. But a lot of times I do my best to let this be the best conduit I can. That's what I'm getting to.
Mentioned, just a few minutes ago, your most recent album, My Father's Hands. You've recorded well over a dozen albums, but I'd like to ask you about this one, if I may. Would you please elaborate, say, on the title and your inspiration for that album?
That was for my dad. Really, my father was
Yeah.
the inspiration for that. It's interesting. A lot of times as I look at my hands now, I see his hands. I think now as he's transitioned, you get time to reflect on, has imparted to me what he will forever mean to me. That collection of songs was his spirit, just to share his spirit. He was a person that wanted to make a difference. He's a devout Christian man, and he loved Christian education. He
Mm.
loved music too, and so and he did everything he could to serve in the church. It's where it says, "All I'm trying to do is serve the Lord to the best of my ability," and that he did. I remember it's like there's Sundays after Sundays, at a certain point when his hands started to get frail, that didn't stop him from sitting down at the piano playing. Even when there were times when during a devotion service, some of the other devotional leaders may not have wanted him to play, that didn't stop him from playing. Yeah. It didn't stop him from serving.
Yeah.
He led a Bible study for many years. And it started from just a handful of people to over 100 people. People from all over the city of Baltimore wanting just to come and be a part of that discussion. He did everything. He did everything to serve and make a difference. And so, thinking about just him, I wanted to do something like that. Just to say thank you isn't enough. I think the best way I could say thank you is just to continue the journey that he encouraged me to do. To continue on that journey of which he said, "Son, I thought if I could get you to music, you'll be all right."
Yeah.
And just to let him know that, yeah, Dad, I'm all right. You've got me to music. And because of that, I'm gonna be okay. Come what may, storms come, storms go, I have music.
Yeah.
When in the lowest of the lowest, I could still play a song. And so that was that was the main engine for that.
Yeah.
All of the songs on that record has something to do with him.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Of all those albums, though, that I mentioned, well over a dozen, is there one album, or maybe two, or maybe three, depending on how you want to answer this question, that you would say is more indicative of your style as a composer? And then is there perhaps an album or two or three that's more indicative of your style as a performer?
Oh, that's a difficult one. Cause
I've been saving that one till we're almost to the end, so I've been saving that one then.
as I reflect on the records that have been recorded, a lot of them feature my original compositions or arrangements
Mhm.
of standards. Once again, I was never one of those recreation people. I can tell you about the story about Betty Carter admonishing me about playing the exact version of Miles Davis' If I Were a Bell. She told me she didn't have me in her band to play something that she already heard. She knew it better than I did because she was there. And she said, "Well, okay, I do understand that you're trying to learn this here, but once you learn it, you gotta, how does it relate to you?"
Yeah.
And so every record, every record that I've done, maybe for maybe the exception of the earlier Japanese records, sometimes the records I did for Japan, they brought a certain list of music, of repertoire that you were supposed to choose from.
Okay.
And so and then, they might allow one or two original compositions. But when I started on Atlantic, I was writing my own music. All of the records on the Atlantic label, they feature a lot of my own compositions. Even a lot of some of the compositions are original arrangements. I did a record, Kaleidoscope, which was kind of an interpretation of greater classical themes. More like, no, kaleidoscope was more like impressionist type of themes, you know. But once again, it wasn't like trying to recreate something. I have to go back to Dr. Robert Stone, a great teacher at Howard University. He said that jazz is about creation, not recreation. And then if I go back earlier in the conversation, and how I was telling you how at Peabody we studied Gregorian chants, and I had to create my own Gregorian chants and things. So I was always placed in a mode of creation. So I would have to really go back. I don't think I've ever did a record of where I just actually just covered something. Or if I did cover it, it's going to come from a different way, different point of view.
Yeah.
Because that's just deeply rooted in who I am.
Yeah. The first song that you performed that I heard came across on the radio. We're fortunate to live. Unfortunately, we don't have a 24-hour jazz radio station here where I live, but we have one that splits its genre, public station, that splits its genre, afternoons and evenings, all jazz. And they were playing your interpretation of Bag's Groove at the time. And I stopped my car and I got on the internet to look up, because it didn't say, and I was afraid they weren't going to say at the end exactly what it was. And I looked it up and I went home and bought it. So yeah, it got me to stop my car. Now I pulled over too. I didn't just stop in the middle of the street.
All right.
But so yeah, I mean, talking about, great music, but then great music keeps giving great music too.
Yes.
Yeah. When placed in the right person's hands. Yeah. Unfortunately, our time is beginning to run short, but I want to ask you as we close about an important commitment that you've exercised over the course of your career, and especially in recent years, and that's collaboration with other musicians.
Yeah.
You mentioned your recent performance at Carnegie Hall, and I want to ask you in particular about that effort and about that collaboration with the Cecilia Chorus of New York that culminated in a performance of your world premiere of Power in the Blood, alongside a performance of Ludwig van Beethoven's oratorio, Christ on the Mount of Olives. Would you please share your thoughts concerning the pairing? We'll start here. Concerning the pairing of those two pieces, and in what ways do they complement each other?
I think they're two different points of view. It's a compelling story from two different points of view. Power in the Blood is kind of I would say a part of a larger work I did entitled The Saga of the Cross, which was, I believe, it was done in 2017. It premiered at the Abyssinian Baptist Church.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what it was is the Easter story. It's the Easter story told from the African American point of view. Earlier, you remember I was talking about how hymns were interpreted, the concept of gospelizing. And so these hymns that told this beautiful love story of the Father sending his Son, it was my intent to use the full African diaspora, not just a quote-unquote jazz thing or whatever, or a gospel thing, but to be able to bring the whole diaspora together. And once again, that's involving too. So my wife, Charlotte, was talking with Mark Shapiro about possibly doing some collaborations, and we started to talk about possible projects, and I told him about the Saga of the Cross, and I presented some things which were done, and she got excited about it, and so they agreed to try to take a portion of it, because the whole work is over 2 hours, because it's music and narrative as well. But even that, there was some new material in it. And so, in the spirit, as I was talking earlier about Ellington, it's just not just it always evolves. It always evolves. And so to be able to present that at Carnegie Hall, a jazz trio with 150 voice chorus in that magnificent place was something very special. Something very, very, very special. It was a moment like no other. And again, we're talking about joy. If you hear me talk a lot, it's always about sending someone away feeling better than when they arrived. Whatever it is. I like to be able to spread the feel good. If you understand what I mean. I want to spread some feel good, I said earlier that there's enough tension in society now. So why not put out a balm of healing? Something to bring people together, singing. So here it is. We are doing that project, bringing people of all walks of life together. And so hopefully one will see just the unity in all different walks of life coming together, singing this powerful music. We spend a lot of time being separate, but at a certain point, it's about high time for us just to kind of celebrate who we are. And if we're going to be one people, if we're going to be one nation under God, we're not all one. Just like, I believe, I paraphrase the scripture, talk about the body. The body is not just one hand. It's different parts that make one. But if the hand decided, if it just wanted to do this thing and, I don't have nothing to do with the foot, that's not a good thing. Everything works together for a common good. Body could work without a hand, but it works better with the hands. And I'm saying all that then is just, some feel good and bring people together from all walks of life, and then send them away feeling better than when they arrive. And maybe just have this music so to have just people just understand this is who we are. This is who we are. I come out of a rich culture and a rich tradition, and I'm very proud of it. And I want to share it every place I can, because that's what I believe I was given this gift to share.
Very much appreciate your willingness to share that gift with us today, too. Thank you. Our guest has been Cyrus Chestnut, widely acclaimed pianist, composer, and master instructor of jazz piano and improvisation at Howard University. Thank you for taking the time to share your insights and wisdom with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for joining us for Saturdays at 7. Christian Scholars Review's conversation series with thought leaders about the academic vocation and the relationship that vocation shares with the church. We invite you to join us again next week for Saturdays at 7.